Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another Torah class with the Rebbe's Insight. We are studying the second talk of the Rebbe in the book Selections from Likutei Sichos, the portion of Toldot. I'm reading in English, page 296. In his commentary on the Torah, Ramban Nachmanides writes about the wells that Yitzchak dug. This morning we study in the synagogue about the seventh well that Yitzchak's servants have dug, and there was no fight over it because they made a pact with the Philistines, and they called that well Sheva. And Rashi says because of the oath of peace that they took with Avimelech and his ministers, Al Kain Kara Shem Ha'ir Be'er Sheva. That's why the town is called Be'er Sheva, the well of Shvuah, of oath. Even though it's not now that the name of the town mentioned in the Torah, it's mentioned already before by Abraham. Vayeshev Avraham Be'er Sheva, Vayelech Avraham Be'er Sheva. We read in the Akedah every morning that Avraham returned to Be'er Sheva. By the way, the biblical Be'er Sheva is the same spot as the Be'er Sheva is today. It's a town in the south. So, says the Ramban, Nachmanides is a commentary to the Torah, but he brings in Kabbalistic and esoteric teachings about the stories. So you read the story, you understand the story, then he tells you that's not the story. The story is about something totally different. The Torah, these are the words of Nachmanides. The Torah speaks at length about these wells, even though the simple meaning of the story does not provide us with any practical benefit, nor does it increase our esteem for Yitzchak. Both he and his father followed the same pattern and dug wells. Says Nachmanides, Yitzchak, we read about the wells. The Philistines filled it. They dig another one. They go to Gra. They dig another one. Now they dig another one. Finally, there is no fight. Abraham, the same thing. We read about digging wells. In the story itself, it's a true story, but it does not have any purpose for us. What does it teach me? How do I conduct my life? Therefore, however, this narrative comes to hint to a hidden message, informing us of future events. For a well of living water alludes to the house of God that the descendants of Yitzchak would build. Therefore, the verse refers to a well of living water, Be'er Mayim Chaim. Thus, recalling the verse, God, the source of living water. Therefore, says Nachmanides, anytime you read about digging wells, the well was stuffed, meaning destroyed. It actually refers to the house of God, the holy temple. And if you go back now that reading, all the times where we read that they dug wells, the Philistines stuffed it, and then dug well, and finally they dug a well that there was no fight and there was a covenant of peace, and they called it Be'er Sheva, you will, by understanding that it refers to the temples, it gives you a whole new understanding of the stories.
How's the connection between Be'er Sheva geographically and Bet HaMikdash?
So soon we'll find out. But what's important to know is that in Israel, there are 6 holy cities. Yerushalayim. Anybody knows another one? Huh? Not holy. Tzfat, correct. Hebron, thank you. Shechem, Be'er Sheva, and Tiberias. What? Jericho was the lack of Israel, of the land of Canaan. They destroyed it and they cursed people who live in there. Jericho is a cursed town. Again, Yerushalayim, Tzfat, Hebron, Be'er Sheva, Shechem, and Tiberias. These are holy cities that are mentioned in the Torah as places that God chose over other places. Wow. Each one is very significant because each one has a direct connection to God. So Yerushalayim is obvious, the Holy Temple, that's where God rests. Hebron, we are told that the reason the cave of Machpelah or the burial site is because it's the gateway to heaven, right? Anybody knows that all the heaven, Gan Eden. That's why all the prayers go to Hebron. From Hebron they are absent. Anybody heard that? It's in the Torah. Okay, it's not. I didn't make it up. Tzfat. Tzfat, Beersheba, Tiberias, we are told that Mashiach, when he arrives and reveals himself, it will start from Tiberias. Also, the Sanhedrin, I believe, had been seized from Tiberias' last location, was in Yerushalayim. It moves to Yavne, and from Yavne, it moved to the north, and that's where it stopped in Tzipori, which is a sister or a village near Tiberias, and therefore the Sanhedrin will have to resume its activities first in Tiberias, and then we'll move back to Yerushalayim. Tzfat, there is, okay, but Beersheba is one of the 6 holy cities. Now, the first well called Asek, if you read in the Torah about Abraham, I believe, he built a well and they had a fight, and he called the well Asek ki is asku imo, because Asek alludes to a fight, alludes to the first Beit HaMikdash. The second, called Sitna, refers to the second Beit HaMikdash. The third, called Rechovot, refers to the future Beit HaMikdash that will be built speedily nowadays without dispute or strife. In that era, God will expand, Yarchiv, that's Rechovot, our boundaries. And concerning the third Beit HaMikdash, it is written, it became wider, Verechava, Ve'archava, and it rose higher and higher. And it is then that we will multiply in the land. So again, this is the verse with regards to Rechovot. Ki ata irchiv Hashem lanu ufarinu ba'aretz. Now that they built the third one that they had no fight over, no dispute, they call it Rechovot. Why they call it Rechovot? Because God had widened our space. Ufarinu ba'aretz will multiply. Says Nachmanides, so far I read from Nachmanides, that this third one refers to the third temple. So if you read in the Torah, wells, digging wells, the first one is called Asek. Asek means a business. A business in a negative connotation means that they are fighting over it. The second one is called Sitna. Sitna refers to animosity. Sin'ah is hatred. Sinas chinam, baseless hatred. Sin'ah and Sitna are of the same root, or same meaning, and meaning that they were fighting. That's the second temple. So the first and the second had many disputes and fights over. The third one they called Rechovot. Rechovot means widen, wide, big, because now Ufarinu Ba'aretz, there will be no dispute over God's sovereignty. So it refers, according to Ahmadi, all 3 wells refer to the 3 wells that Abraham had dug. Yitzchak goes and digs the same wells that his father dug in the foot. So I guess, I don't think it's a 7th well. Maybe it is. I don't think so. It could be, it's the 7 lambs or the 7 sheep that he puts to make the oath. If you read by Abraham, I told you, it's not 7, it's actually Shvu'ah. Rashi says it's an oath, it's not Sheva. Beersheba is the well of oath, not Be'er of 7th well. It means both, but Rashi singles out. I just read it this morning. Rashi said Be'er Sheva, the well that was named and dedicated after the oath.
Rabbi, is the town of Rehovot linked to this?
It's in the south. That's why there is a town called Rehovot. Rehovot is in the south. I doubt it's in the same place, but it's definitely come from the biblical story here. Beersheba, I know for sure. There are many proofs that it's the same place. not Rehovot. Rehovot is a little bit north from that area. Well, now there are other allusions to the three Batei Mikdash in the stories of the patriarchs. For example, Sifri and Midrash states, Abraham saw the Beit HaMikdash built, and he saw it destroyed, and he saw it rebuilt and perfected in the ultimate future. As it is written, God will see, God will be seen. Similarly, Yitzchak saw the Beit HaMikdash built, and he saw it destroyed, and he saw it rebuilt and perfected in the ultimate future. As it is written, see the fragrance of my son, like the fragrance of the field that God had blessed. Similarly, Yaakov saw the Beit HaMikdash built, and he saw it destroyed, and he saw it rebuilt and perfected in the ultimate future. As it is written, how awesome is this place? Certainly it is nothing other than the house of God. The Sifri and the Midrash, both, the Sifri and the Midrash both say that all three of our forefathers saw the Beit HaMikdash built, destroyed, and rebuilt forever. As you read about the stories, there are allusions. Yaakov, when he had the dream of the ladder, he was in that place. And he says, how awesome this place, it must be God's house. Ein zekim bet Elokim v'zeh sha'ar hashamayim. This is the gateway to heaven. So he saw the Beit HaMikdash built, destroyed, and rebuilt. And it's part of the story that he, Vayira, and he feared, Vayomar, and he said, how awesome is referring now to the ultimate Beit HaMikdash. Same as Yitzchak, same as Abraham. You read about in the stories that Yitzchak, this week's portion, when Yaakov comes in and he's blessing him, he says, the smell, the odor, or not the odor, the aroma of my son, the fragrance of my son, is like a field that God had blessed. And he called Beit HaMikdash in the word or description of field, but he refers to the Holy Temple. What?
Two temples. What about the third?
We don't. No, they are talking about either the first or the second, but they also saw the ultimate temple.
Ultimate I got.
Which one?
Yeah, which one?
I don't know, but I assume it's the first.
So how come
Because the first had God's revelation to the ultimate way, the second one wasn't.
That's one of the reasons why Moshe wasn't going to go to Israel. Because if you would build
There will be no destruction. Right. What, Ali?
Okay.
I'm not sure,
Right.
but they say
I'm surprised that they don't.
and it might be that they saw both. By the way, by Yaakov, you see three referrals to the Holy Temple, both of them that he's scared, and the third one that is awesome.
We seem to be missing a temple there.
Huh?
We seem to be missing one of the temples. Is that in the next slide?
It says the Medrash tells us by Yaakov. I remember now by Yaakov, but the same as Abraham and Yitzchak. I remember by Yaakov, it says 3 times temple. Here is the words of Yaakov says, when he got up, Vayira, and he got scared or he feared, Vayomar, Ma Norah, how awesome, Hamakom hazeh, Makom, this place is the first time. Ein zeh, it is not, but only Bet Elokim, house of God. Now is getting to the second temple. V'zeh sha'ar hashamayim, and this is the gateway for heaven, referring to the third temple. In all 3 forefathers, the connection, the wording there is allusion or referrals to the 3 temples. So the first that were destroyed, and the third one that will be the ultimate one. Yet, by explaining the allusion to the Beit HaMikdash in the narrative of Yitzchak digging wells, Ramban does more than add meaning to a story whose simple meaning does not provide us with any practical benefit. Although the patriarch's vision of the Batei HaMikdash are alluded to in the verses, as explained by Sifri, Ramban's explanation, which associates Yitzchak's well with the Batei HaMikdash, reflects an added dimension. So the Sifri tells us that all of them saw the temple destroyed and rebuilt. But Nachmanadi, when he talks about wells, and the first one is called Esek, the second one is called Sitna, the third one is called Rehovot, he's doing a lot farther by Yitzchak than by Avraham and Yaakov. What is this? Sifri and the Medrash mention the patriarch's vision only in general terms, that they saw the Beit HaMikdash as it was built, destroyed, and rebuilt, without explaining that they had visions of the first, second, and third Batei HaMikdash. By contrast, the allusions to Batei HaMikdash made by the name of Yitzchak gave to Wells, Esek, Sitna, and Rehovot, hint to each of the three Batei HaMikdash in particular, as Ramban explained. That's number one. Okay, Ali, does that solve your issue? According to the Medrash and Sifri, they're not talking about particular Batei HaMikdash, 1, 2, 3. It's just one, destroy, one, rebuild forever. That's it. Ramban, when he named the three wells, he's connecting each particular Mikdash to one particular well. B, Sifri and the Medrash relate that the patriarchs merely saw the Batei Mikdash. Yitzchak's digging of the wells, by contrast, was an act of the patriarchs that serves as a sign to their children, for their descendants, serving as catalyst for and empowering his descendants to actually build the Batei Mikdash. Rebbe says, Nachmanides is saying that Yitzchak dug wells. Digging is different than vision. They saw.
Abraham didn't dig well?
Yeah, but he's not connecting Abraham's wells to here. Only Yitzchak. Because Abraham it did not call them by names. Yitzchak is the one who called them names. Esek, Sitna, and Rehovot is only by Yitzchak, not by Abraham. He went and dug the same wells that his father dug and who filled. But Abraham did not name them. There's a whole discussion why Abraham did not name them and only Yitzchak named them. But according to Sifri, they only saw it. You see it and watch. You are a spectator. You're not a player. When Yitzchak, Ramban is talking about Yitzchak, he's a player. He dug the well, which is a sign for his children to build the temple.
Well, why wasn't Abraham digging of the well to sign his children to dig the temple? Why don't we?
Let's find out.
Also, there's a connection that Abraham and Yitzchak had children who were not on the right path. Yaakov had also tzaddikim.
But it's about Yitzchak. The discussion is about Yitzchak, not about Yaakov and Abraham. Everything is possible. We can explain this concept based on the axiom that all the acts of our patriarchs, particularly those mentioned in the Torah, are, as is true regarding every aspect of Torah, significant in every detail. Accordingly, the reason that the three Batei HaMikdash are alluded to specifically by Yitzchak action of digging wells, even though all of the patriarchs saw the Beit HaMikdash built, destroyed, and rebuilt, is because here the focus is on the dimension of the Beit HaMikdash that shares a particular connection with Yitzchak. Now it addresses your point, Ali.
No.
Why only Yitzchak, not Abraham, not Yaakov? Because the holy temples have a specific connection to Yitzchak, and that's why we read about Yitzchak digging wells as opposed to Abraham and Yaakov seeing it in a vision.
Well, but Abraham dug wells.
What?
Abraham dug
But he did not name them.
wells. But the whole thing is that they watched them rather than digging, but Abraham dug.
So another answer that comes to mind is by Abraham, all his wells had no future. They were stopped.
Okay.
Yitzchak, the third one, did exist. And it's in today's portion, the fifth aliyah, as I read this morning in the synagogue. Yitzchak, after they made a covenant, they had no fight anymore over it, and he called it Rehovot. It is possible to say that the allusion here is to each of the Batei HaMikdash individually rather than the general concept of Beit HaMikdash. That it would be built, destroyed, and rebuilt, as the other patriarchs saw in the Beit HaMikdash, because here the emphasis is not on the common factors shared by all Batei HaMikdash, but on the unique individual quality each one expressed. In turn, the distinction between the Batei HaMikdash results from the fact that each one was built in a different way than the other two. The distinct qualities are therefore alluded to not by the patriarch's vision of Beit HaMikdash, but rather by their actions, and more specifically by Yitzchak's digging wells. Says the Rebbe, the Nachmanides, that connection connects between Yitzchak's digging action of wells to the three Beit Mikdash is very unique, because each one of the wells and the name is exactly a description of the future when that Beit HaMikdash will be built. And therefore, it's a sign for us to understand what each one of the temples served, how was it created, and all the details involved. And each Beit Mikdash is unique. When it comes to Avraham and Yaakov, all they see in a vision, built, destroyed, and rebuilt forever. Here, there is a specific details of each one of the three that are unique to that one, and can only be revealed by understanding the digging of Yitzchak, each one of those three. This concept can be clarified by first explaining the connection between the Batei HaMikdash and digging wells. What's the idea of digging a well to the building of temple? It seems that it goes contrary to that. You build a temple, you build it tall. The entrance gate, the doorway to the Eichal, to the hall in the Beit HaMikdash was 100 amma tall. 100 amma is 150 feet tall. There was an opening 150. There were doors. The doors were only, I believe, 30 amma, which is about 45 feet. And above there was a wall, but there was an opening. The entrance was, so you build it high. Digging well, you have to dig deep down. What's the connection? There are two general types of bodies of water acceptable for ritual immersion, for a mikveh. A mikveh which is made by human activity, and B, a spring which is of divine origin and not made by man. So you can use for mikveh to purify, which is the ultimate purpose of water, for it can be done in two ways. One, a human hand that created the mikveh. B, a spring that come out from the depth of the earth and comes up. It's called Maim Chaim. It's Ma'ayan Maim Chaim. It's a spring that goes forth, and it's kosher for mikveh because it's natural. Wells represent an intermediate state between the two. Do you understand that digging wells is in between those two categories, right? The first one is man-made, creating a hole, filling it up of rainwater. The second one is a spring that comes forth. Here, a man digs, but he does not place the water there. The water in the bottom, and they are not coming up. They're there, but you have to draw the water from the bottom. So it's an intermediary. On one hand, they are made by man's digging. He's expanding of effort, and labor. On the other hand, the well's water, which is its essential element, is not created by human activity. Instead, by digging a well and removing the earth, a person makes it possible for the water that is below the earth's surface to burst through and fill the well. Did you understand why it's intermediary? Because the water are not out there by themselves. The man had to put a lot of effort and hire contractors and apply for permit to make sure he does it right and it doesn't cave in and nobody else is injured. So there is man's effort. That's the key word. However, the water themselves, which is the most important element, is not man that brought it there, like a mikveh. It's the water that's there that are collecting in the ground. All it is remove the boundaries, remove the coverings to reveal the water. So you have two components that are joining together. You have the man removal of the elements that block the water, and then you have the earth providing the water in a natural way.
There's three different kinds of water.
Right. Thank you. He's a very smart student. So you have now three bodies of water. You have water for a mikveh that men dug and the rain fell in and he filled it up. That's all men hand. You have another one where it's a spring that come forth. Men didn't do nothing. And then you have a third one, men digging a well. He removes the boundaries, the rocks and the soil, and the water are collected there by themselves from the bottom of the earth. This point has halachic significance. As Rabbi Yosef Karo writes in Code of Jewish Law, a well that is made by human activity, even though its water does not flow outside the well, is governed by the laws applying to a spring for all purposes. The rationale is that the water is not brought into the well by any human activity. A person merely digs in the earth and reveals the water. Thus, even though the water was revealed via human activity, it is obvious that a well is governed by the laws applies to a spring for all purposes. I am not going to go in through details, but when you go to immersing in a mikveh, there is a difference between a mikveh made by man versus a spring. I'm going to give you one example. There are many other differences. Water that came by a man creating a mikveh, like modern day mikveh, when a man immerses, they must be standing water. They cannot be moving. So therefore, if you have a filter like we are in our mikveh that circulates the mikveh, it doesn't put new water, but the water are moving. If a woman who needs to make a bracha, or I dip dishes that I make a bracha, dip yourself into the mikveh. While this filter is working, you didn't do the mikveh, you have to go back.
So
A spring, huh?
So what do? You stop the water from moving?
Yeah, I have a switch.
And it shuts it off and then.
It shuts it off, you wait a minute for all the water, and then you immerse, yeah. Now, in New York, in large cities, that's why they write down who comes to them, uses the mikveh. Even though it's very private, that's why you need trustworthy women. And when they write each day who came, and they put it in acronyms, they put it in a way that nobody can, other people. And the reason is, sometimes they discovered that the filter was working, or there was a crack. If there's a crack, the water are coming out. If the water are coming out, it's a moving water, not kosher. Now, we used to have.
So we have to call them back and say, hey.
So they do, you're right. Every person that comes has to give a phone number, of course. They would call them in the middle of the night. Sometimes they had questions, and they would go to the rabbi, and the rabbi says, there's a crack. If they discover a crack, they would call even the day before and say to the women, please go back. And they have to make a bracha again, because the mikveh was not kosher. Now, when it comes to a spring, the water can be moving. If they are moving, it's kosher. Did you understand before the question? I want to go on to explain you something. Okay, thank you. So that's why I do not recommend, but I'm showing you information. In Williamsburg, they have dug a well, they've dug a mikveh, they've created a mikveh that are connected to a spring. So the women, when they go down, they have to go many, many steps. So they take an elevator, let's say four stories down, literally, 5 stories down. And then the steps leading to the water, 150, who knows how many, a lot of steps. Because the springs sometimes go up, sometimes go down. Now, the reason they want to connect it to a spring is because if there is cracks in the walls, that's the biggest issue, then it's not an issue. I know of a Chabad rabbi in New Jersey that was able to locate a spring just on the spot where he built a mikveh. His father is a very famous Moel who came here for my children. He wouldn't travel anymore, but for my children he did. And he said to me that his son was able to put a column, build a column of cement. There is no pipes. Pipes makes it not kosher, that are connected to the spring, and therefore it's a much greater quality. You know what the biggest problem? You wouldn't think about it, but heating the mikveh is an extremely expensive project because the water constantly moves. The water are moving, so therefore, and sometimes it's cold. Even though there is heating everywhere under the floor or whatever they do, it doesn't help. Now, when we dug the mikveh here, it was supposed to be connected to the next house. We just couldn't. Everything was caving. So we realized so much the water table was very high here. So what we did was there is a well points. Well points is that they took pipes with points, and there is a big pump that pumps water 24/7 to a ditch. And the well points, there were pipes into the ground below the surface for 24/7 digging water from the area. They did it for about two weeks Only 2 weeks later, we realized that it's dry enough to try, and then we moved it 6 feet away. That's why there's a corridor between the mikveh and the other house. It had to be moved, otherwise the walls would fall in. But the point I want to make is that the builder at the time, he was very in touch with the rabbi in charge of the mikveh. He offered me to connect it to a well. Not to a well, to a spring. He says, here in Florida, it shouldn't be that hard because once you dig. However, I said to him, no way, I don't want, because I knew that it's cost prohibitive to hit the water, because the water constantly have to recycle. They have to be part of the well, after part of the spring. Let's go back to our discussion. No, it doesn't matter. Easy said.
Don't let the girls hear it.
I would like to go back. Now, there are many other halachic differences between a mikveh and a man-made mikveh versus a spring. One which we're discussing now. Mikveh, the water must be standing still. Spring, the water continuously moving. By the way, the ocean is treated like a mikveh. The spring is just like a spring. So if I want to go into a mikveh, to an ocean or to a river like the Tiberias, the Kinneret, it has to be standing water. If the water are moving, and don't ask me the details. The ocean is considered like a mikveh, not like a spring. It's a little bit confusing. I'm not going to go into it.
So when we came here and we put our dishes and everything, we went
To the mikveh, to the ocean. For the dishes, it's acceptable. But I that's why I don't want to get into it. I want to go back to our discussion. Rabbi Yosef Karo, Bet Yosef, Code of Law, which this law is accepted by all. Where does a well belong to? Does it belong to a mikveh? Or does it belong to a spring? Tells us the Bet Yosef that the well belongs to a spring. Even though man had created the source because he dug down, says the Bet Yosef, I believe that's what he says, that the man did not bring the water down. The water were there. What he did is remove the barriers, remove the coverings, remove the debris, but he didn't bring the water. Therefore, even though the water are not living like a spring, they're not coming forth up, they are still on the bottom. They are treated like a spring, not like a mikveh. Similar concepts apply with regards to the Beit HaMikdash and its construction. The ultimate purpose of the mitzvah of building a sanctuary and the Beit HaMikdash is expressed by the command, make a sanctuary for me and I will dwell within. That is a fundamental purpose. And that is the fundamental purpose is that God's presence dwell in these structures. Yet we are commanded, make a sanctuary for me. Before God dwell within man's activity is required, he must make the dwelling for God. Says the Rebbe, now I understand, now we understand the connection between a well and the sanctuary. What's the ultimate purpose of the temple? To bring God down. On the other hand, God can come by himself. I cannot pull God, schlep God down. Yet God says, make a sanctuary and I'll dwell among them. In other words, just like a well. The well, you did not bring the water there. The water was there. But by you putting the efforts into removing the barrier, the dust, the dirt, and the rocks, you reveal the water. The water are now useful, and therefore they are considered like a spring. In other words, the Beit HaMikdash, in order for God to rest in the sanctuary, you need to put effort. We have the job of removing all barriers to allow for God to rest among us. Just a minute. The first thing we're talking about the comparison between a well and the Beit HaMikdash. Well, you have human hand, yet it is fresh water from the source, and they are treated like a spring. So is the temple is about bringing God. However, God will dwell among us only when we create the sanctuary by building the temple.
So what about Beit Knesset? Like this?
Just a minute.
We didn't.
This resembles digging wells, even though the essential element of the well, the water already exists naturally, Scripture puts a focus on man's act of digging the well. Indeed, one who digs a well becomes the owner of its water, as reflected by the verse, the waters is ours. Says the Rebbe, there is one more element to a well. The well, the water over there is don't belong to anybody. Nobody can claim ownership. Nobody acquired it. Yet in Jewish law, legally, as it says in the Torah, lanu amayim, the water amay. As soon as you dig a well and you find water, no one is allowed to benefit from those water in the well, because by doing so, he's robbing the man who dug the well. How does it become yours? Money, I earned it. My house, I built it. The answer is, as soon as you put in your effort by digging, God will give you the other part and make you the owner. In other words, you acquire not just what you dug, but everything in it. Yes.
I don't want to sound funny. You buy the land, everything on it is yours.
Right. But in the desert, when it's no man's land, in a public domain.
Apart from oases, you find no water in the desert. If you come to oasis,
Well, there is oasis, many oases.
Come here first, it's your well is yours.
Right. The question is, what makes you own the well? You didn't pay for it. It's everyone's.
So what happened about the third temple? That's no effort by man?
Possibly to this conception of the mitzvah of building the Beit HaMikdash, that its building and sanctification must come about through human activity, also has halachic consequences. And consequences, the rabbi is saying, here is, I'm going to skip on that. The first idea, the Rebbe says, God says, "V'asuli mikdash, let them build me a sanctuary." Is this a responsibility on every individual or on the community? Says the Rebbe that the obligation is on the community, not on in each individual. Number two, just like in the actual building, same is about the exact location and the structure. In other words, if you want to fulfill God's will, to bring God, just like a well, you have a very specific way of digging. You cannot just dig anywhere you want. You have to find a place that has water to dig. Otherwise, you're digging, you would find nothing. The same is with the temple. You have to follow exactly the way God instructed us. And you cannot use different material, different size, different height, etc. Now, we are on page 304, number 5. Hey. Based on the statements above, it is possible to clarify the noble achievement in the construction of Beit HaMikdash as compared to the sanctuary made by Moshe in the desert, and similarly, the difference between the three Batei Mikdash. Now we can understand the comparison between the three temples and the Mishkan, the tabernacle, also to understand each individual temple's uniqueness. With regards to the sanctuary, it is written, "You shall erect a sanctuary according to the guidelines, and as I will show you, as I showed you in the mountain at Sinai." God showed Moshe how the sanctuary should be built. Thus, making the sanctuary did not involve seeking out, because it was constructed according to the specific directives that God taught and showed Moshe. Consequently, the making of the sanctuary was lacking, because the Jewish people did not have to labor in seeking out the manner in which it should be built. Thus, it did not resemble digging well. Says the Rebbe, when it comes to the tabernacle, God gave very specific reason: the height, the material, the size, everything went to the specific. He already showed Moshe. All they did is follow the diagram, follow the blueprint. The Holy Temple, on the other hand, they had to dig. They had to decide the height. They had to decide the size. They had to decide the material. They had to, and actually they kept improving it. In the second temple, they built it from wood at first. Only later they improved it. Herdus came and made it a solid building of stones. At first, they had all wood. They couldn't afford a solid building. So they improved over time. There was no construction, there was no plans to follow. So the idea of well is better connected to a temple than to the tabernacle. That's why when they had visions or connection to the temples, there is no connection to the tabernacle.
So Shlomo built the Beit HaMikdash
With God's spirit, Veruach Hashem alai.
So he knew what size
He figured it out, correct. But still, there was improvements and changes. It's not like when God showed Moshe, he showed him the actual building. It's much different. A different pattern was followed in the construction of the first Beit HaMikdash. Through everything was in writing from the hand of God, which he gave me to understand. This is King Solomon. That is, God showed David the entire plan of the Beit HaMikdash, and David wrote it down and gave it to Shlomo. Nevertheless, the actual construction of the Beit HaMikdash involved the participation of many Jews over a long period of time. Moreover, the construction was accomplished not by David, to whom the prophecy was conveyed, but by Shlomo. Says Rabbi, it's a whole different story. Here, his son was the one who actually built it, not David that saw it. In addition, it took many, many more people, and it took much, much longer, 7 years, I think. Furthermore, even David himself, though he received a vision from Hashem, which he gave me to understand, expended his own energies on the task. Thus, Sifri states, continuing its explanation on the charge to seek it out and find it. We find, this is the Sifri, we find this allusion in the following verses regarding David, of whom it is written, remember God, for David all his affliction that he swore to God, he vowed to the mighty one of Yaakov, I shall not come into the tent of my house, I shall not give a sleep to my eyes until I find a place for God, dwelling for the mighty one of Yaakov. Thus, it is evident that David made a strenuous effort to try to find the location of Beit HaMikdash. Only afterward was he notified of it by a prophet, as Sifri proceeded to state. In other words, even the location of the temple wasn't so easy to find. David had to figure it out as his own, and it took him a long time, many, many sleepless nights. Only when he picked up the Jebusite, Hittite, Jebusite, whatever his name, he was told by Nathan, this is the location God wanted. In other words, there was a lot of human effort into the building of the temple.
How do you even begin with what you're supposed to do?
Huh?
How would you even begin to book it?
Well, he had some understanding of what God wanted. It should be in a tall space, but not the tallest. And it should be in a place surrounded by mountain. He describes it. It tells it, yes. The Rebbe goes on to explain the uniqueness of each one of the temples. In the first temple, most of it was by God, even though, as we said, there was a lot of human effort, yet God's involvement was greatly into it. The second one, man had to have done most of it by himself without God. In other words, the digging of well by the second temple was farther and much harder than the first one. And therefore, says the Rebbe, that what will explain that each one of the temples correspond to the three forefathers. Abraham corresponds to the first temple that didn't last. The second one corresponds to Yitzchak, and the third one corresponds to Yaakov. Yaakov was Tiferet, which would last forever. We will, and then the Rebbe connecting all three in essence to Yitzchak, because when Mashiach will come, we will say LeYitzchak Avinu Ata. Only Yitzchak is the one who is able to stand up for God and say, bring Mashiach. Anybody familiar with the Medrash? God will turn to Abraham, and Abraham will say, rebuke the people. Yaakov would say, if they don't behave, they don't deserve. And Yitzchak said, they are your children. My children, I love them equally. You're supposed to love them the same, and God will forgive the Jewish people and build the temple. That's why Mashiach will arrive, will turn to Yitzchak and say, you are our father. We will be tracing ourselves to Yitzchak. LeYitzchak, yeah, Avinu Ata, yeah. And therefore, that's why Yitzchak is the one who involved actively with actual digging of the wells, because it resembles all three temples. Now, what does that have to do with us? Anytime you want God's holiness, Shabbat is a holy time. You want to have a sanctity in your relationship, you must realize that God's blessing comes after you are digging. The water are there, the blessing is there, but you have got to dig. If you do not dig, sometimes it involves more effort, but if you are digging, you will be blessed with God's water that come forth, and they are treated like a spring, living water. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.